Chapter 30, Culmination 6. Chapter 11, Culmination 6. 1997, 1998. Percy is 21 and 34. Severus is 36. Harry is 17. And Dumbledore no longer lives. The day that follows is horrid. The ministry is all aflutter. Ripples of tension and anxiety and fear wavering through the air, like the strings of a cello plucked and left to reverberate without supervision. Several people overcome their fear of Percy to ask him, worriedly, if the Order is going to invade the ministry, and he scowls away from the entwined hope and the despair that he sees reflected in their wide gazes. The inner sanctum of the minister's office is no more peaceful than the busy hallways outside. Percy snaps at Julian to fetch him a tea and sends Matthew on the futile task of sorting through the piles of post accumulating at a seemingly interminable rate. Only minutes after Julian returns with his tea, Percy is confronted by a delegation of goblins accompanied by the brutish department head of magical creatures, who seems seconds away from cursing the lot of them, his unpleasant face twisted into a snarl of self-righteous hatred. Percy through Pews reminds both where their loyalties ought to lie and points out that it was the goblins' defenses that were breached, and one consequence of the goblins' insistence they be allowed to guard their own vaults is that the ministry has no liability in case of a break-in. Nothing was stolen. The goblin delegation lead spits out triumphantly. Nothing was taken by the filthy wizards, but a vault on the lowest level of the bank was nearly destroyed by dragon fire, and the goblins expect the ministry to pay. Absolutely not, snaps Percy, speaking as himself. Glaring at the goblin, Percy is reminded suddenly of Auntie Muriel facing off with her account manager. You're a shrimp, she tells him, and the sudden unexpected pain of the memory sharpens his tone. You have no proof it was even Potter. Nothing was stolen, and the only illegal activity that occurred did so in protected goblin space, under jurisdiction of the last great accord. My word on this matter is final. The goblin gives him a dirty look, his compatriots behind him baring their teeth. Diggory would have helped us. Diggory's dead, Percy says crisply, even as the new head of the department scowls at the reminder of his predecessor. Both of you ought to remember who our new leader is. Now get out of our sight. The minister must meet with the head of the Auras as you failed to apprehend the intruders yourself. Nott is, of course, eager to pursue Harry, and he's already marshalling a force of his secret forces, easily identifiable by the magical circlets they wear on their upper arms, but each to their own, when Percy and Pews arrive, joined belatedly by Yaxley, who reports in an undertone to Percy that the mudbloods downstairs have taken advantage of the confusion of the morning, shouting, fear, blame, apprehension. The usual aftermath of whatever nonsense Harry has got himself into to organize a mass escape, disappearing without a trace except for a set of obscure muggle tools. Fine, Percy thinks uncharitably to Tonks. Well done. Percy gives a little shake of his head as they draw close to Nott. No need to open this new tin of dragon worms, not when they already have Nott nearly frothing at the mouth with eagerness. Percy cannot prevent Nott. The boy who lived was cited illegally breaking into Gringotts, even if they do not have strict proof to the same. But Percy can derail him, and he tells Nott that Potter was cited with Sirius Black, who likely was breaking into his own vault, and that Percy believed it likely that they would flee to the southern countryside, where the Black family was reputed to have a summer manor. Nott's sharp eyes narrow at this tip, rendered so helpfully by Percy, who can admit he has not been entirely successful in hiding his dislike of the other man. But Yaxley, idiotic, arrogant Yaxley, comes to his rescue, corroborating his story and saying that his parents had once been to said Black Manor before the first fall of the Dark Lord, though he wouldn't quite expect Nott to understand. This Nott is not the Nott, but a second cousin, and so would not have been invited to any particularly privileged gatherings that the Black family would have had. His face goes nearly purple with indignation, but Yaxley technically ranks higher than him in the unofficial, amorphous social hierarchy enacted according to the Dark Lord's whims, and Nott knows perfectly well that to ignore such a tip and lose the boy in the process would certainly be the end of his career, if not his life. Given that Percy had just invented said summer manor, He isn't sure why Yaxley had said such a thing, but perhaps he had accidentally hit upon the truth, and Yaxley's parents had summered with the blacks. So Knock goes, and he takes his odious team with him. Then there is a press conference. Pews, in neatly pressed green robes, speaking to Potter's rebellious nature, informing the masses he merely vandalized the bank but did not steal anything from the vaults, just a crazy boy looking for trouble, etc., ad nauseum. The cup. Presumably, Percy writes back to Snape, hiding in the loo for a few blessed minutes to avoid the hordes of people outside. Again, bloody fucking imbeciles. The trio, not the ministry workers, though he supposes the obscenity applies to them as well. Had Harry just spoken to Andromeda as directed, the locket would already have been destroyed, and Percy could sleep with ease. Percy does not want to know how the four teenagers broke into Gringotts, nor what they thought they'd accomplished. He writes in a strong hand, idiots. He has summoned me this evening. You likely will be as well. A pause, then. I can feel his anger. We must be ready. As soon as Percy reads those words, he realizes that he too can feel the Dark Lord's anger, that it has been roiling underneath the surface of his own anxiety, his mark pulsing with it. Nott must have been able to feel it too, and Yaxley besides, which Percy thinks explains some of Yaxley's hesitance to reveal the missing mudbloods and his sudden willingness to rid the ministry of the secret aura force. So Percy frets away the rest of his day, hoping Tonks will contact him, assuaging the fears of the many wizards at the ministry who believe anarchy is among them, as if they were not already in an untenable situation, and plotting and disregarding ways to contact Harry. The Patronus would be the easiest, but in a moment of privacy, Percy pulls out his wand to try, and cannot think of a single memory that produces anything stronger than mist. Out of sheer desperation for a distraction, Percy goes to inspect the Muggle-born holding cells, where he sees, as Yaxley mentioned, a scattering of Muggle tools. Percy had not taken Muggle studies, but he can guess as to some of their functions due to his father's various obsessions. One is certainly some sort of knife, and one is a clip for the hair, and one even seems like a small yellow duck, though how that helped the Muggle-borns escape, Percy could not say. Likely they were planted by Tonks to distract anyone who may be looking for an explanation. Percy peeks inside the other room and sees to his surprise the Dementor is still there, though he is alone, his two offspring having disappeared. Percy has checked on the Dementors a few times, but typically only the younger two are there, silently floating and showing no inclination to speak to Percy. "We're still here," Percy blurts out, taken aback by the strange sight of the inky black shadow of the Dementor against the sharp, gleaming white walls. "I thought you had left long ago." "I had my own tasks to complete," the Dementor says, "but I knew you would come today after the commotion." "Did you help?" Percy asks curiously. 2 missing guards plus 2 freed Dementors is an equation that is difficult to stomach but easy to solve. And in truth, Percy does not particularly care about those wizards. After witnessing their thuggish brutality for months, Percy can safely say that he finds them to be the animals far more than the Muggle-borns they despise. The Dementor's chuckle reverberates through Percy's head. They were instructed to apprehend anyone trying to escape. Percy can read between the lines on that one. He doubts the Dementors care about the lines between Muggle-borns and wizards. He doubts they were trying to do the right thing by taking down the guards. But Percy can appreciate when disparate goals align, and he thinks suddenly that the Dementors have been as trapped as the Muggle-borns in their own way. "Well, I've come to you because I need help," Percy says. Then he adds sheepishly, again, "I will be leaving this land today," the Dementor cautions him. "We travel east to find our clan." Percy feels an odd sense of bereavement, which is plainly ridiculous, considering that he is not friends with this creature, and in all truth he should be relieved that it is leaving him. But it is not about him, and he can recognize he is being unfair. "As is your right," Percy says graciously. "I wish you luck, and please let me know if I may help you." "I have learned to recognize your soul," the Dementor says solemnly. "I will be able to find you, should I need. And don't forget I still owe you a debt." Percy hesitates and then says clearly, so that his words cannot be misunderstood, "I will not forget what you have done to help." It is rare to find a wizard that will keep his word. Percy shrugs uncomfortably, thinking of his family, of Landon, of Tom. "There are many promises I have not kept." The Dementor hovers closer to him. What is your last question for me? For a second, Percy says nothing. If he does not say the words, he does not have to learn the answer. He can fail at the task, and it will not, strictly speaking, be his fault. He will have plausible deniability or something like it. But Percy, damn him, is a Gryffindor. His mother's voice echoes in his head. Do what needs to be done. And so he opens his mouth. One of the Horcruxes has grown powerful, absorbing the other's magics into his own. One last second of the blissful before, when Percy does not know the answer. He is more powerful than I, how can I? Well, how can someone destroy him, his soul? We do not have a hope of destroying his form beyond magical repair, not if it came to a duel. Not if it came to a duel of magic. Something in the Dementor's voice is not playful but mischievous, maybe, or knowing, as if Percy is missing something obvious. But what in Merlin's name could a duel of the soul look like? Percy insists, not particularly interested in being the butt of an obvious joke. I have the stone, but it's not. I mean, I can't. He fumbles over the words for a second, clutching unconsciously at the small grey stone that is always in his pocket. You can, and you will, if there is no other way, intones the Dementor serenely. Percy scowls, but the Dementor says nothing more, even when Percy tries to plead with him. He merely floats silently until Percy gives it up as a lost cause, subsiding angrily into silence. Fine, Percy says grumpily. But if I die, I expect you to come and collect my soul personally. A ripple of a laugh moves through the room, causing the Dementor's robes to sway and ripple like waves collecting at the shore of a pebbly beach. Then the Dementor inclines his head, and his voice floats into Percy's head one final time. I have learned much from our association, it says, and I hope to speak to you again before it is time for me to collect your soul. Wait, Percy cries out, as the Dementor begins to disappear backwards through the hall, suddenly afraid to let this wise being leave him alone with Tom Riddle's soul. But the Dementor does not stop, fading away until only Percy remains, his hand still clutching the stone. Expecto Patronum, says Percy suddenly, hopefully, but he produces only mist, as usual. Speaking to the Dementor helps give Percy the strength to continue through the rest of his day. Even when he learns the Order, or some group similar, staged an attack on the Prophet and melted 4 of the 6 wizarding printing presses, an act which the remaining 2 will work overtime to disparage in tomorrow's paper. Percy soothes the ruffled feathers of the editor-in-chief, who bristles like a large, horned owl at the indignity. Percy wearily sends a missive to Nott to request security at the Prophet printing house, sees to it that Pewes has done nothing too odd in the few hours since Percy last renewed his mental instructions, and then goes via the toilets to his flat, which is blissfully empty and silent. Well, empty and silent it may be, but after the first few minutes of blissful solitude pass, Percy sits upright on his sofa and calls out hesitantly, Tom. Only answer Percy receives is a soft, questioning hoot from Hermes, who cocks his head at Percy from his perch in the kitchen. Percy waves away his owl and collapses back on the sofa, though his bliss is marred now by anxiety. Very strange for Tom to not contact him, not on such a day. In fact, Percy would have expected him early, either to complain vehemently about Harry or to agonize or gloat, depending on his mood, about the Dark Lord's public failure. What if Tom had gone after Harry? What if Harry were already dead, and Percy had spent the last few crucial hours of the war playing at Minister? Looks like you finally made yourself head boy of something. But at what cost? And what had possessed Harry to break into Gringotts anyway? How had they managed it? What had been so tantalizing a prize to justify such a reckless action? Percy regrets that he hadn't tried harder to find Harry and just tell him everything that had occurred. He'd thought it'd be easy enough to find the boy when needed, and safer for all parties for him to delay contact until it was, strictly speaking, necessary. Well, now it is necessary, and the boy is nowhere to be found. Percy spends the 2 hours between the end of his workday and the time that his mark begins to burn thusly, though he forces himself to break for supper, to at least have some sustenance in his stomach for the inevitable cruciatus that he will receive for his many failings. As a result, when his mark does begin scalding his arm, he is more rattled and discomfited, rather than serene and relaxed, as he always hopes to be before answering a summons. Inside Parkinson Manor, Cyprus conspicuously absent, as usual, The scene that greets him would have destroyed any hopes of serenity Percy would have had, even if he'd succeeded in calming himself down earlier. The second that Percy walks into the room, his eyes snap to his little sisters, bound and struggling weakly against thick, heavy ropes, flanked by Tom and Severus, both of whom are watching carefully for his reaction. "Percival," says the Dark Lord, and Percy freezes and then drops to his knees, half out of instinct and half because his legs feel too wobbly to support him. Severus is watching him with such a look of intensity that Percy feels it scald its way down his body, searing across him like flames, in stark contrast to Tom's expression of cold curiosity, which glances off Percy without impact. "It has become quite urgent that you retrieve for me the prophecy." "My lord," mumbles Percy through numb lips, after an eternity of time passes, which could have been 3 seconds or 3 hours, so great is Percy's shock. "Ginny, oh Ginny, what has he done?" Hadn't she been hiding? Hadn't Severus protected her? If Severus hadn't protected her, that would mean Severus had no choice. Percy tries to focus on that, instead of the dread and sorrow and panic that thuds heavily through his body with each slow, sticky heartbeat. But he cannot. Ginny's eyes are the exact brown of his mother's, and they latch onto his and stay there, unmoving, full of an expression Percy cannot name, as inexplicable and foreign to him as every expression his mother has worn on her face while speaking to him, as if they are on either sides of a distorted mirror, and he is blinded by the sun. "Harry Potter has declared a state of war," continues the Dark Lord. Perhaps an observer would think his words light, or reserved, or at the very worst merely cool. But Percy flinches at each one. So attuned is he to the nuances of the Dark Lord's magic that he can tell instinctively that the wizard is furious, like a tightly coiled spring set with an animation charm seconds from flickering into being. And so I shall respond. Find me the prophecy, Percival Weasley, and we will end this war before anyone is harmed in the aftermath. Percy nods robotically, unable to tear his eyes from Ginny, who struggles all the more desperately when she hears Voldemort's intentions. "Yes, my lord," he whispers, and the sound of the Dark Lord's high, cruel laugh lashes over his back like a whip. Asterisk Severus has to nearly wrestle Percy through the side apparition to Hogsmeade and the long, cold walk to the castle. Hogwarts is eerily silent, but Percy stumbles beside Severus as if in a dream, feeling cold and empty and strangely numb. Only when they arrive in Severus' office does the sound seem to return to his ears with a painful roar. "I bade you to protect her," Percy snaps at Severus, who turns on Percy with his eyes flashing, his hooked nose accentuating the sneer of unease marring his lips. "I cannot ignore a direct order from the Dark Lord, as well you know," Severus hisses back. "If the girl had the sense to stay hidden, this could have been avoided. The Carrows must have suspected where she was. By the time I returned from my earlier audience with the Dark Lord, she was captured." Percy glares at Severus, his chest heaving. "She is in the hands of the Dark Lord, Severus. My sister, my sister." His voice breaks on the last word, and he sits heavily on the chair in Severus' office, so familiar to him from his days in school, and yet so odd underneath him, as if it were not wood supporting him, as if the world had reassembled itself when he was not looking, and he can no longer trust what he once knew. "Percy, she will be safe," Severus says carefully, taking a seat on the other side of the desk. Percy looks up at him hopelessly, part of his mind still in the manor, watching Tom take charge of her care. Tom, his expression unreadable as he volunteered to see Ginny settled. Percy had not been able to protest, not with both Tom and Voldemort watching him, not when Voldemort dismissed him and Severus, an ugly expression of triumph marring his pale face. "In Hogwarts," Severus continues, "she is a pureblood, and she is your family. The Dark Lord and Tom know that to harm her without cause would be more than you could bear, and both believe they do not need to threaten you to keep you compliant." "Then why kidnap her?" Percy cries out, kicking savagely at the solid wooden desk, as if he could bring it crashing to its knees. "For one, because you have ignored his orders to fetch the prophecy," Severus points out wryly. "And yes, I advised you to take that action." Percy shuts his mouth dispiritedly, caught just seconds before accusing Severus of that very thing. "But I do not believe he took Ginevra for you." It takes a second for Percy's mind to latch on, and then, "Harry," he growls angrily. Bloody Harry Potter. He's going to use Ginny to lure him to his trap. Yes, Severus confirms heavily. Percy kicks again at the desk, but without much fervor. This time, he registers the pain in his toes and winces, feeling very close to tears, or perhaps a cruciatus. Even the calm, familiar surroundings of Severus' office, though without its array of odd potions, paraphernalia, and ingredients in green bottles, it is nearly a different room. The pine-scented walk they take into Hogwarts, past the shuttered Hogsmeade shops, the three broomsticks defiantly open, though dreadfully empty, or the reassuring sounds of the castle, eerily silent, all of the students confined to their house common rooms, though it is still before curfew, are insufficient to ground Percy, to give him something to lean on while planning his next move. We must move very carefully, Severus says precisely. We will modify the memory of the prophecy so that it seems that we fetched it today. As soon as we give it to the Dark Lord, he will want to summon the boy to him. I will convince him that we ought to tarry for a few days more, to allow him time to prepare for the aftermath of his victory. But Ginny, your sister will not be harmed. I will make sure of it. Percy begins to say that Severus had promised the same while Ginny was in Hogwarts, but then he subsides and looks down at his hands. Ginny's safety is no more guaranteed than the rest of theirs, not when the future of their lives depends on these next crucial days. Somewhere inside Percy, his mind begins to wearily begin anew, thinking through what must lie ahead. He will want an audience. Do we want him to want an audience? He will kill the boy if the boy comes to sacrifice himself. Severus does not say what they both already know. Prophecy or no, Harry will sacrifice himself if he believes it necessary. If Dumbledore is to be believed, whatever sacrificial magic he is hoping will take form may save the boy's life. It would be beneficial to us to have an audience for that. But if not, Severus gives the faintest shrug of his shoulders. If the boy dies, it does not matter. We will still have to destroy the locket, the diadem, and the Dark Lord himself. Unless we can accomplish all of these tasks at once, then the rest of the world will hear of Potter's death, whether or not there are many Death Eaters present. So we must contact Harry. We must destroy the locket and ensure Harry is ready to die. Percy nearly falters on the last words, but he forces them out despite himself. How will we find him? You found him once before. Tom found him, not I, and we cannot tell Tom what we are planning. Severus looks at him soberly. To Tom, he says, and his voice is suddenly low and intent with meaning. Beg him to find Harry for you. Tell him you wish to enact your own private revenge. He will understand that. If you have only seconds alone with the boy, you know what to say. But we need Harry. We need one of them to open the locket, corrects Severus, and his words are raw and terrible. But both have proven to be capable of destroying a Horcrux. More importantly, we need all three of them to be destroyed within days. Percy is silent as he absorbs what Severus has said. Their time of delay has ended, suddenly, and earlier than Percy had thought, but he'd known it always would have to have ended, and they no longer have time to hope matters will arrange themselves nearly. I've not done anything at all, he says finally. Before Severus can protest, Muggleborns perhaps saved, length of the war perhaps shortened, Cedric's life for Landon's, all these little trinkets that Percy accumulates and stacks in his mental library to counterweight his sins, Percy waves him off. The least I can do now is act. Like a snake in the grass, he thinks to himself for the first time in years. He'd thought he'd have become skilled in the art of action by now, skilled enough at least to know when and how to take decisive action. He supposes that to live 2 lifetimes and not learn the same lesson twice suggests that he will never learn it, not even in a third. There is something else, Severus says into the silence. Percy catches the strange note in the man's tone and looks up, frowning. Severus does not meet his eyes. Percy begins to rise instinctively, his internal alarming charms ringing like church bells on a mountaintop, slowly at first, and then sonorously loud as the wind picks up. Lucius has returned to England. Yes, I had heard. Severus nods soberly, cutting off Percy before he can begin. He wrote to the Dark Lord to tell him that he will turn over the Elder Wand in exchange for his family's protection. The Dark Lord told me as such, but I did not believe Lucius would try such a thing. Severus' gaze snaps to Percy so quickly that Percy has to steady himself against the chair he just stood from. You should have told me that the Dark Lord spoke of this to you. I suppose I forgot, Percy admits, his cheeks flushing. I am sorry. He admitted to the Dark Lord that he'd thought Draco may be the wand's master and fled to protect his son. Abroad, he learned that his suspicions were false. He's brought the Dark Lord Grindelwald as a proof of his loyalty. Lucius is going to put you in danger, Severus. Percy bites out, his hand tightening on the back of the chair. He has no debt to you, I imagine. He must have learned that his heir has been sighted with Potter. Severus does not look angry nor betrayed. Instead, glimmering in his dark eyes is pity and understanding and even a strange, brittle warmth. Lucius is not a good man, but he cares strongly for Draco. The Dark Lord will kill you for the wand, as we'd feared. As he did in another life, Severus reminds Percy gently. If his tone had been harsh, perhaps Percy would have found this knowledge easier to bear. As if were the idea of losing Severus so needlessly, so close to the end. He feels a strange pang in his chest, all the stranger for its cause. Severus has never been nice to Percy, except for when he tried to protect Percy's siblings, or when he'd come to check on Percy, or when he'd threatened Tom for Percy. Severus is not nice, but he'd welcomed Percy into his home and made him oatmeal with fresh berries and tutored him and pushed him and gave him courage and strength. No, Percy says, and Severus glances up, his face registering surprise at the ice in Percy's tone. No, Severus, not like this. But we do not need the prophecy, says Percy with finality. We cannot justify realizing so belatedly that Trelawney, under your supervision, was in fact the true seer. We will tell the Dark Lord that Harry has the Elder Wand. Did I misspeak? Lucius has gone to Grindelwald, Severus bites out. Grindelwald has told him Dumbledore was the wand's master. But Dumbledore did not kill Grindelwald, so it follows logically that one must not kill someone to confer wand ownership, Percy says, not recognizing his own voice. Either Draco had the wand's allegiance, in which case Lucius undoubtedly won it shortly after, or you did. And killing Dumbledore, it rattled you, though you'd thought it would be easy. You hated him so much that his death came as a shock to you. Harry defeated you in a duel that night, but you were too embarrassed to tell the Dark Lord. And we will tell the Dark Lord that if he were to duel Harry outright, he will lose. It comes to Percy in a flash, millions of small clues coalescing in one sudden, jagged moment of realization. He's lost in a duel to Harry before. When? Severus breaks in impatiently. In the ministry. That was no duel. In the graveyard. Percy's words begin to tumble over themselves, as if determined to have him trip and sprawl at Severus' feet. Harry told us. The Dark Lord gave Harry the chance to duel, their wands connected, and again in the ministry. Harry threw off the Dark Lord's possession. The Dark Lord has spent the last 2 years trying to augment his magic through dangerous elemental rituals. He's gone through more wands than any wizard ought to. Don't you see, Severus? He's scared. The Dark Lord is not afraid of Harry Potter, but of the prophecy, Severus protests. Potter is a boy. No, Percy says authoritatively, shaking his head. I know him. I have served the Dark Lord for 2 lifetimes, and I have served 3 versions of him in this, Percy says softly. Severus falls silent. He is afraid of the prophecy, but more so of Harry. Harry has defied him many times over. He is a boy born of prophecy. His father gave him the invisibility cloak. His father had a home in Godric's Hollow. The graves there are marked with the symbol of the Deathly Hallows. Oh, Merlin, don't you see, Severus? We can make him believe that Harry is trying to become the master of death. But then the Dark Lord will never attack him. We will tell him that Harry will sacrifice himself for Ginny. It's not even a lie. Percy shakes his head with an incredulous laugh. For years, I've been telling Tom the truth. This is the truth, too. Harry will come to sacrifice himself. The Dark Lord will win. The Horcrux will be killed. The prophecy fulfilled. And Tom. For the first time, Percy falters. But when he looks across the table to Severus, he sees that awful look of resigned pity is gone, replaced by the harsh burning in his eyes of which Percy is intimately familiar and far more fond. As it has many times before, this warms Percy enough for him to force out, whichever of us is still alive will kill him. It will be easier for me to die, says Severus with a rusty laugh. Percy doesn't smile, but he becomes slowly aware that he is baring his teeth in a strange facsimile of a grin, but far less preferable to me. The silence of his flat is reassuring, to a point. Hermes shuffles on his perch, and Percy pauses to listen to the familiar scratching of his claws on the wood. Who would take care of Hermes when Percy died? Perhaps Charlie, Ginny, of course, for Percy knows perfectly well that he is unlikely to survive the week. Even if the Dark Lord believes their story about Harry and the wand, he will summon Harry to him, and one of them will win, and Tom will destroy the victor. And Percy will be next to die. Severus might think that Percy has a hold on Tom, that he would be able to influence him, or even, he blushes despite himself, seduce him. But Percy knows better. He knows Tom. He knows that his use to Tom is rapidly diminishing while his danger grows. Percy has been many things to Tom over the years: a tool, a follower, a confidant, an audience, an ally. He has been swayed by Tom more than once. Percy knows he can be easily persuaded, and that he lacks the sort of essential moral character that the heroes of the story, Harry and Ginny and Tonks and even Landon, seem to possess in spades. But if Percy has only one positive trait, he likes to think that he is honest and clear-eyed, at least in the privacy of his own mind. Once Tom defeats the Dark Lord, he will inherit the Dark Lord's militia and likely attract a horde of new, eager followers swayed by his attractive, confident charisma. He will have the ministry already conquered and Hogwarts already controlled. He will have adoring audiences by the dozens and fearful, admiring young men by the bushel. They will obviate Tom's need for Percy faster than they can bear their arms for whatever mark Tom chooses for his own. "We will be partners," says Tom, and Percy shakes his head, a bitter, fond smile spreading against his lips. His flat is so achingly still and quiet that it offers a cold, thin slice of absolute clarity. Every single thing that Percy knows about Tom marks Percy as a threat. Every scrap of knowledge, every side comment, every moment of vulnerability, taken together, they comprise a dangerous chink in Tom's shields. Percy wouldn't keep himself alive if he were Tom, and Tom will need to die. "There's power in a dying wish, says Myrtle, wise Myrtle, dear Myrtle." Percy had not seen Myrtle at Hogwarts. He could not bear to see her, not when what he needs now is to feel cold and fierce and calculating, like a soldier made of stone, removed from the troublesome feelings that prevent all humans from living their strongest lives. If Percy is to use his death wisely, his aim must be true, must narrow to the most focused of tasks. Destroy the locket. Give the items of the will to Harry. Keep Severus alive. Use his death for a purpose. Tom will be distracted when Percy dies. Percy knows that too. He does not linger on why. He allows the emotion to float away from him, dissipating like so many others into the cold silence of the room. It logically follows that if he must die at a moment where Severus, or Andromeda, or Tonks, or McGonagall can take advantage of Tom's distraction. As for Tom, well, Percy does not know how he feels about Tom. He thinks he knows how he could have felt about Tom if their lives had been different, if he'd met a new version of Tom, one with the same painfully clever mind and clear, powerful magic, one with the same sinuous grace of his limbs and soft press of his lips, one who called magic to his bidding for magic's sake, and not to kill or dominate or destroy. Alone in a flat he paid for with gold he'd coaxed into being from a small, blood-red stone, Percy sits cross-legged on his couch and stares at the empty portrait in front of him as if it is a mirror. Inside his pocket, his hand goes unconsciously to the small grey stone, though he does not use it. He does not need to see his soul, not when he sees everything all so clearly now, as if the truth has been lingering like mist around him while he'd been unwilling to acknowledge the damp residue on his face. Percy was always meant to die in this world. He tampered with events that he oughtn't have touched. It is the first maxim of time magic, of all magic, really. Magic demands a cost, and typically a cost proportional to the gain. Percy might have saved the lives of his family, though of course that remained to be seen. He might have saved Cedric's life, though he damned Landon. He might still save Tonks, and Lupin's, and Colin Creevy's, and everyone else who died at the Battle of Hogwarts. And he will pay for it with his own life, as he should. What can be created can be destroyed, and Percy had created himself and so will destroy himself too when the time is right. Strangely, the thought does not sadden him as it once had. Instead, he feels gladdened, oddly so, like horns are ringing in his chest, like the air is refreshing and sun-warmed and light on his skin. He will be proud to give his life, to end this misery, if it results in a better world. His own soul is full of shadows and darkness and curse scars. He has no place in a bright new world of peace and prosperity. Better to die with grace and make it count than to limp in shame toward the light. Expecto Patronum, Percy says, and a ghostly figure emerges from his wand, as he'd suddenly known it would. It is larger than his raven, far larger than the sparrow that he'd once been able to summon. It is a large, feline form with intelligent eyes and muscled shoulders, as graceful as a shark as he realizes, dives toward him. She looks at him silently, and he sees flecks of shimmering gold in her eyes among the silver, and he feels unaccountably warmed by her, and protected and shielded from harm. Send a message to Harry Potter, Percy tells her, his voice steady and without hesitation. Harry, I will meet you at dawn inside the London house. Bring the others. Someone we both care for deeply has been captured. I will come alone, except for the women who now own the rights to the house. I swear this in memory of the map I once gave to you. Percy's patroness leans forward, and for a brief, interminable second, she presses her forehead against his. He closes his eyes. It is the closest feeling to an embrace that he has had in many years, and he relaxes into it, some of the tension that perpetually hunches his shoulders seeping down into the floor. Thank you, he whispers, knowing that these words are for his patroness alone and will not be heard by Harry. Thank you for coming when I called. His patroness nods solemnly at him, as if understanding his words, and then leaps with a snarl past a silent Hermes and out into the dark, still night. Even suspicious, frightened Harry Potter will find it difficult to ignore a lioness patroness. Tom comes, as Percy knew he would. He comes and kicks off his shoes, settling on the arm of Percy's couch with a proprietary air, a position that reminds Percy suddenly of that old photograph of Tom, languidly perched on a chair in the great hall. Percy perches on the chair opposite, hoping Tom will not notice that the empty frame is now in his closet, behind his old school robes. Narcissa would probably say that Tom needs a drink, certainly with a flash of his old artistic insight. Percy thinks that the only complement to the long, sharp lines of Tom's lean figure would be a gently smoking crystal glass, filled with some amber liquid, horrendously expensive and produced with the manual labor of some creature or another. This reminds him suddenly of Tobias, brazenly ordering whiskey at 10 in the morning, and Percy blinks away the regret before it can show traitorously on his face. These will be the most important days of Percy's life. He cannot allow sorrow to cripple him so close to the end. Your sister is safe, reports Tom. He looks up and flashes a smile at Percy that feels brittle and dangerous. She's older than I recall. Percy smiles back blandly. He has locked every feeling he has ever had about Ginny tightly away, not to be accessed until this horror is all over. I wasn't aware you recalled her at all. Tom produces a theatrical performance of pressing a finger to his temple and meditatively explaining how defeating the diary allowed the diary's soul to flow into his, the diary's memories to meld with his. Percy is not sure whether he believes Tom, but he supposes it does not matter. Everything seems to be thrown into sharp relief by the sight of Ginny, captured and vulnerable. Percy feels gratitude when Tom explains that he installed Ginny in one of the Parkinson's children's chambers and bullied Cypress Parkinson to provide her with a house elf. But he feels curiously absent from his body, particularly when Tom bestows upon Percy one of those sharp, angular grins that typically makes Percy feel queasy in his stomach. I am going to die, Percy keeps thinking to himself as he watches Tom. These will be the last moments of my life. Severus had a private audience with the Dark Lord, Tom says finally, crossing his legs and leaning forward intently. I thought you might know what he had to discuss so urgently. We failed to find the prophecy, admits Percy. Tom frowns, and from the bottom of the deep well of Percy's reserve, he drudges up an attempt at an apology. I'm sorry, Tom. I really thought it was the divination professor at Hogwarts, but we interrogated her thoroughly. She may not remember giving the prophecy, Tom points out coolly. I used the mind magics that you taught me, Percy breathes, leaning forward and unconsciously mimicking Tom's position. Do you recall those? Of course, whispers Tom, his eyes catching Percy's face and pulling his attention with a jagged tug. I remember everything now, everything about you, everything about what we've shared. Percy does blush, despite his attempts to stay in control. The heat in his cheeks startles him and makes him feel off balance. Tom will always be able to ignite that confused fire in Percy's stomach. Damn him. For a second, Percy wavers, and he sees his indecision mirrored in Tom's face. Severus is going to tell the Dark Lord that he ought to proceed with his plan regardless, Percy says quietly. The prophecy is likely lost to us forever. We cannot cripple ourselves for the rest of our lives. So it will be soon then, replies Tom thoughtfully. He considers this and then nods slowly, as if to confirm a private hypothesis. I am ready. Percy takes a moment to breathe. What he is going to say next will dictate the outcome of the war, perhaps. He licks his dry lips and then says intently, leaning forward just infinitesimally, I need you to allow the prophecy to be fulfilled. What are you asking of me? Tom asks sharply. Harry Potter is going to come as soon as we let him know that we have my sister. Potter is going to come and offer himself up as a sacrifice. Surely not, Tom says incredulously. It will be a trick. Dumbledore has raised the boy to die for his honor. Percy looks steadily at Tom, willing him to believe it. He will sacrifice himself if the Dark Lord promises his loved one's safety. Tom leans back, uncrossing his legs in a smooth, sinuous movement that catches Percy's attention despite himself. And you wish for me to honor this promise too, I imagine. I must admit, I find it strange, Percy, that your loved ones are so similar to his. My loved ones are powerful, pureblood wizards, Percy says, with a bite. They are Gryffindors, yes, but they are strong in magic, though misguided by Dumbledore. I do not have a lot of family honor, Tom, but I do not want them harmed until I decide otherwise. To restrict your followers to only those in Slytherin House would create a far smaller society than I imagine you'd want to rule over, unless I've misjudged your ambitions. Tom's eyes are all right with a private excitement. And what will you give to me in exchange for my promise? I want you to kill the Dark Lord, Percy continues, not deviating from his plan. Harry must be killed by the Dark Lord. Tom must kill the Dark Lord, and Percy must remain above suspicion, right until the end. I want you to take over his base of power. I want you to end the war, Tom, and then I want you to rule right. The words hang in the space between them. Percy watches as Tom glances up unconsciously, as if he can see them there and read them from the air. And how, pray tell, could I do that? All of the dangerous mudbloods have been killed already, Percy points out. Now to distract Tom, to keep him busy ruminating on the particulars of his power, to ensure he spends the first, and hopefully last, days of his rule quietly, without enacting revenge. Allow them to return to our society, though in their rightful place. We need them to fill positions in our society that we otherwise lack. Judge people on their magical abilities, not their family names. Do not kill without cause or pursue vengeance without a limit. You have been busy, comments Tom evenly. Planning out how you'd reign, were you? All those nights at the ministry, alone with the Minister of Magic. You mistake me, Tom. Percy struggles with himself and then stands from the chair, using the momentum of the movement to carry him past self-doubt and onto the seat next to Tom. Tom is very still and very tense, alert like a wild animal, and Percy makes his voice soothing, willing his body to ignore the intoxicating feeling of proximity to Tom's magic. I have no desire to lead anyone, really. I wish only to be by your side if you'll have me, as a follower or a friend, or something more. This time his blush is only partially genuine, and for the first and likely last time, he is thankful for his traitorous complexion. But we have a chance to do it right, Tom. You will never die. You have the chance to do it right for the rest of time. Percy gives an incredulous laugh at the concept. To be the last leader our society ever needs. He's been focused on the now, on the boy, on elemental magic, on the Elder Wand. You are the only one focused on the future. Percy pauses here, looking at Tom's profile, but the other wizard is very still, staring ahead at the clear patch of wall where his portrait once stood. Percy has the strange, sudden thought that perhaps it is odd for Tom to see this opposite view. I am going to die, Tom, Percy continues softly. The truth, always the truth with Tom. Perhaps not today, but one day I will pass from this world. I'd like to leave behind a more just and fair one, the type of world I'd be happy to be born in. I do not have the power to do that, but you do, Tom. Please, do this for me in my memory. Tom turns now, and seemingly without thinking his fingers grasp Percy's wrist in a punishing grip. I will protect you, he nearly snarls. I do not wish to be immortal, Percy says gently. He hesitates and then folds his other hand over Tom's. He won't be able to reach easily for his wand, but he has the odd sensation that perhaps he won't need it. It is enough for me to know that I have asked you to do this in my name. Tom squeezes Percy's wrists tightly, so tightly that Percy can feel the bruise begin to form as the blood vessels beneath his skin begin to break and spill into his skin. Then Tom flings Percy away from him and launches himself to his feet, pacing around the room like he'd so often paced in his portrait. You want me to rule, Tom says, shaking his head. To care about these insipid little wizards and their problems. To mold, Percy corrects him. To remake the world in your image. You are the greatest wizard of our time, Tom. If not you, then who? I will think on this, Tom says almost distractedly, not meeting Percy's eyes. I need to think. I had not decided what I would do. Harry and the Dark Lord belong to an old world where a prophecy can rule over all our lives, when in truth perhaps it never even existed. Percy stands, but does not move towards Tom. Don't you want to create a new world, one ruled only by magic? By power, Tom, by fairness. I have to think, Tom hisses, and without further ado, he disappears from the room. As usual, when Tom disappears, he takes the energy in the room with him, and Percy sags in his absence, feeling suddenly exhausted, as if he'd run around the Great Lake. In truth, the conversation with Tom had not gone precisely as planned. Percy had not thought that what stymied Tom was an anxiety over ruling, or that Tom would think to equate ruling over people with caring for them. It is an odd perspective for Tom, and one of which Percy cannot easily imagine the origins. Although it occurs to Percy as he stands in the shower, relaxing into the hot spray of water. Your last shower, perhaps. His traitorous mind whispers, and he ignores, that perhaps the Dark Lord is frightened of ruling too. For all of Tom's intellect, and the Dark Lord's ambition, for all of their shared disdain of Dumbledore and of the ruling elite class, neither seem particularly interested in changing society in a meaningful way. Of course, by one metric, everyone's lives have changed indelibly over the past few years, but their society now is not very different than how it was before, not in any sort of meaningful way. Approximately 1/4 of all graduates from Hogwarts are Muggle-borns, and they've all fled or gone into hiding, so their absence echoes in every part of the average wizard's life, from vacancies at shops to reduced staff in the ministry to emptier pubs after work. But it is very odd that Tom, who had been so deliberately and disdainfully excluded from the power structures of his world, would not want to destroy the old world and create a new one. Percy cannot really imagine it, even if he takes Tom's selfishness into account. Perhaps Tom believes that anyone worthy of power is capable of seizing it himself, regardless of what manacles their society may clasp on their wrists. Percy steps out of the shower and wraps himself in one of the large, fluffy bathrobes that Tonks had teasingly purchased for him so many years ago. He'd never used one before, imagining both Tonks' look of glee and Tom's scorching look of disdain, but he finds to his surprise that it is quite warm and nice and comforting. Suddenly, he misses Tonks, misses her desperately, as he sits heavily on the corner of his bed and clutches at the ends of the robe. And then he's missing Charlie, too, and Landon, and even Henry, the smug, punctilious Pratt, and Fred and George and Lee Jordan, and Mariana and Theodora, and the soft glow of Hogwarts in the evening. Suddenly he's missing those trips to the pub with Cedric, the surprised feeling of inclusion whenever Percy attended Quidditch games, and found himself welcomed, after only a brief pause, into the collective masses of red and gold, the solitary walks he used to take around the lake, the sticky warmth of cauldrons bubbling in a small room while Severus swooped around authoritatively. And Merlin, he's missing Myrtle, her impish smile and know-it-all demeanor, the way the sun warmed the stones in her bathroom as it filtered in through the high, crystal windows. He's missing Ginny and Ron and even Bill, missing the clamor of the breakfast table as his mother portioned out bacon and eggs with an eagle eye, missing the soft sounds of his father working on a spell, so diligently despite the rest of the family's joking disdain. Oh, he does not want to die. Not now. Not when in this life he had so many things he'd lacked in his last life. Not when he feels like he's finally learned something about himself, about the realities of living, some sort of truth that sits heavy in his chest and gives him strength. "You have forsaken your right to choose," Percy whispers harshly to himself, tearing the robe off him so that he shivers naked and cold in the center of the room. "You have come here to do what needs to be done." And so he shall. Percy has always been capable of doing what needs to be done, even if he has often misunderstood what the right thing to do may have been. But Merlin, he misses them all, and it burns, a little, even as it warms him to know that, in this lifetime, he still has something to lose, despite it all. Percy indulges himself with one of the flasks of dreamless sleep that Severus had left for him a few months ago, and as a consequence, he actually is more or less rested when he blinks his eyes open at the sound of his alarm. He still covers his pale, tired face with a heavy glamour before slipping his finest silver robes over his head. He must arrive as an authority today, must corral Harry and the others into some semblance of order, must ensure they listen to the crucial news that he bears. He does not want them to associate him with the pained, pathetic creature he'd been during their last meeting. Tea, one of his favorite varieties, a strong English breakfast that he would bring back to his mother if he ever sees her again. An extended meditation session, fortifying the strength of his wards and wiping away his emotions, which condense on the ceiling of his mental library and loose large droplets of anxiety and sorrow to land perilously close to the bookstacks below. Back in his body, rather than his mind, he writes a quick note to Severus, who is undoubtedly awake as well, and feeds Hermes. With a crack, he arrives at number 14 Grimmauld Place just as the sun is breaking its watery rays over the hard shell of the night, the golden yolk of the morning dripping wetly through the sky. Tonks is waiting for him in one of her familiar disguises. She grimaces at him in greeting and then brushes past him. A second later, Percy feels the sickening lurch of side along. They materialize into being in the dark, narrow staircases of headquarters. Percy notices with a glance that Andromeda has made some small, but significant, changes. The elf heads are gone, for instance, and the dusty black chandeliers that creaked ominously overhead have been replaced with brighter wall sconces. Andromeda is waiting for them at the bottom of the stairs, outside the large wooden door that leads into the kitchen and then the parlor. She looks nearly as tired as he feels. "Took you long enough," she says brusquely, raking her gaze over him penetratingly. "Stopped at the beauty salon first, did you?" "One's appearance is one's armor," Percy says loftily, quoting one of Auntie Muriel's favorite sayings, and one that undoubtedly the Black Sisters would have heard from their mother as well. Andromeda's lips quirk in amused recognition. "I take it you are not possessed, then?" "Unfortunately, no." Percy gives a vague gesture, as if to encompass the entirety of the complex mess he has found himself mired in, just balancing multiple appearances. "As one does," Andromeda says, shaking her head. "Come, they are here." They walk through the kitchen and into the sitting room off to the side, where a fire roars fiercely in the grate and 4 teenagers sit silently, waiting for him to arrive. At the sight of them, Percy releases a relieved breath. There had been a moment, dressing at dawn, seeing the faint fingers of the sun claw against the oppressively smoggy night, that he'd been sure they would have ignored him. "Hello," he greets them, a tad stiffly. They do not look displeased to see him, though he does notice all 4 of them are holding their wands, albeit likely for different reasons. As his eyes flick over the 4, Percy notices that Ron and Hermione are sitting very closely together on a small couch, while Harry and Draco face off on 2 chairs to either side. Percy and the teenagers may have stared at each other all morning, but Andromeda gives him a little shove between the shoulders and he stumbles forward, Tonks right behind him. She takes a position near the fireplace, leaning casually against the wall, while Andromeda hovers in the doorway, her wand tightly held in her hand. Percy wavers with the idea of conjuring another chair. All the seats are taken, but then clasps his hands behind his back and straightens, unconsciously mimicking Severus' lecturing position. "Thank you for coming." "Are you a Death Eater?" Harry asks bluntly, not rising from his seat. Harry looks perhaps the most tired of them all, his hair beginning to grow out into his dark green eyes, the scar on his forehead jutting out prominently. Percy's eyes are drawn to it. It must be from the Horcrux, of course. Percy wonders faintly whether Harry has discovered what lurks inside his soul. Percy blinks at Harry, nonplussed by the question. "Not exactly. Draco thinks you're a Death Eater," Harry continues coolly. Percy wonders when Malfoy became Draco. Draco stirs in his chair. I said that I am fairly confident he is a spy, he objects. I know he is a Death Eater. We were marked on the same day. But Ron thinks you might be possessed. Might. Ron interjects. A pulse jumps in Percy's jaw. He tries to loosen his face, realizing belatedly that he'd been clenching his teeth. Bloody hell, Harry. I think it's a tad more certain than might. Percy attempts a reasonable tone. I'm not being possessed, and Hermione said you wouldn't have been able to send us a Patronus if you truly were a dark wizard, Harry persists. Percy turns grateful eyes on Hermione, who smiles wanly at him. It was quite a lovely Patronus, too. So are you going to turn us into him, or are you going to help us? Harry says with an air of finality. We need help. Percy gives up his attempt to project authority and conjures himself a seat. After a second, he creates two more, one for each of the Tonks women, who sit on either side of them so they are in a flattened sort of circle. What is it that you need? One last second of hesitation. Percy keeps his eyes steadily on Harry's as the boy seems to come to some private decision in his mind. Percy can nearly see the moment that Harry decides to trust him, whether out of desperation or his own conviction, Percy could not say. Reaching into his pocket, Harry pulls out the locket. Percy does not miss how the other three flinch at the sight, Ron's face paling, and Hermione pulling her legs in more tightly to her body. We need to destroy this. Do you know how? For a moment, all Percy can do is stare, transfixed, at Slytherin's locket hanging from Harry's clenched hand. It seems to whisper in his ear, a gentle susurration that stirs the hair at the back of his neck and glides sensually over his cheekbones. It sounds like Tom, and Percy feels a great pang well up inside him, a great sorrow. Tom could be convinced to rule correctly, and Percy could rule at his side and watch over him and ensure that he does not stray from their ideals. Percy, says Andromeda quietly, and Percy shakes his head, coming back to himself. Yes, I do. Serious, Harry breaks then, his voice hitching, and some of the bitter intensity leaving his tight posture. Ron leans forward, and even Draco flinches into himself. Hermione clears her throat and meets Percy's gaze. It possessed him, she says in a small but steady voice. He wanted to wear it. We determined it needed to be worn, that it needed enough magic to render it active enough to be opened. Sirius thought he would be strong enough for it. We think it killed Regulus, too, Draco says. Percy does not miss the way that Andromeda tenses next to him. He has the sudden urge to lay his hand on her wrinkled one to provide her comfort, which is odd because Andromeda of all people has never needed his comfort. Hermione throws a cautious look to Harry and then continues. We didn't notice at first. He was so angry all the time, cooped up at the house, that we thought he was just grieving Dumbledore's death, but it was influencing him. It was influencing all of us, Ron says hoarsely, his freckles stark against the pale, gaunt pallor of his skin. He flushes a second later, but even the glow of his blush is not as strong as Percy remembers. It told me I was worthless, and I believed it. I stormed out. We couldn't get back in, Hermione confirms. Sirius warded the place against us. It was my fault, Ron says weakly. Percy watches with narrowed eyes how his brother sends Harry a pleading, apologetic look. Ron was wrong to leave, but Percy still does not like the way that Ron orbits around Harry, how he is still so eager for Harry's approval. I'm so sorry, Harry. What happened? Percy breaks in, somewhat impatiently. Hermione picks up the thread again. Since we'd lost the locket, we thought we needed to find the other Horcruxes, she says, her voice a low-throated murmur that sounds out of place on a schoolgirl form. Although, Percy thinks, looking at the grim, dark look in her eyes, and the alert way that she holds her body, and the leanness of the muscles that flex and tense as she moves positions, Hermione has plainly not been a child for quite some time. But we didn't know where to look. We didn't have much to go on, you see. But surely Dumbledore, Percy begins, not noticing the frantic shake of Ron's head. Harry stirs long enough to say listlessly, Dumbledore told us nothing, left us nothing, except the bloody diary. Percy starts at this, avoiding the others as they glance involuntarily at him at the word diary, and begins digging through his bag, retrieving the objects from the will and laying them out on the low table. He does not interrupt the teens, and so while they eye his actions curiously, they do not halt the telling of his story. In a way, they seem eager to tell this all to Percy, to tell someone other than themselves. And then we all went and got ourselves captured, Ron says, as if to hurry the story along past his failures. Then Draco broke us out. He said he didn't want to be there anymore. Percy gives Draco an impressed look. Draco catches his gaze and flushes himself, just slightly, a pale pink spreading against his cheeks and neck. Good for you, Percy says softly, and Draco nods, just once, in acknowledgement of everything that has passed between the two of them, and everything that could have been different. Anyway, with Draco, we thought we could get back into the house. Ron continues. Harry continues to curl into himself on the armchair, breathing heavily, as if he were trying not to listen to his friends tell their story. And we could, since he's the Black Heir and all. But, Percy interjects, frowning at Draco, but you and your mother told the Dark Lord otherwise. Well, we lied, didn't we? Draco snaps back, the embarrassed flush deepening across his fine features until he looks far more like a ruddy schoolboy and less like a porcelain statue. Mother did try, but she did not try to invoke entry as an heir of the Black family, and she thought that the Dark Lord would not think to ask her as such. Percy shakes his head, smiling ruefully to himself. He wonders whether Narcissa Malfoy would find a way to lie to the Dark Lord in every timeline, and what Tom's reaction to that would be if he ever could know. Anyway, Ron interjects forcefully with a worried look at Harry, who with every second seems to grow more distant from them. Inside, we found. Cousin Sirius tried to kill us, Draco says, matter-of-factly, when Ron too falters at the end of the story. He'd gone mad. He was convinced that he could use the locket to raise Regulus back from the dead. He thought we were trying to stop him. He didn't even recognize Harry. He cursed Granger badly. Percy swings his gaze to Hermione, who nods faintly but does not elaborate, except for a raspy. He called me a mudblood. We all dueled, Draco says, with a bit of an embarrassed cough. He stunned Weasley. Oh, come off it, Malfoy, Ron scoffs. He immobilized you in the first 5 minutes of the duel. But I remained conscious for the rest of it, Draco snaps back. Enough. Percy looks again to Hermione, who seems to have her wits about her more than the others. Harry is silent, the gleam of the locket's chain glinting as he slides it through his fingers. Tell me what happened. Hermione swallows roughly but picks up the story. Harry managed to defeat him. He took his wand and the locket. As soon as Harry had the locket, Sirius came back to himself, but he was different. Different. Different how? Sad. Guilty. Crazy, says Draco, definitively. Harry's voice, steady and cool, cuts through their comments. He stole the locket in the middle of the night and then killed himself. The other three all flinch again, violently, bodies jerking as if they'd all been hexed at once. Percy gapes at them. His gaze swings to Tonks, who nods somberly. After all of that, after the claim speech and the dagger, after Percy murdering Bellatrix, after inducting Andromeda into the Order, Sirius Black had chosen to die of his own hand. Percy thinks of the corpse tucked away in bed, hands folded neatly over the locket, and shudders. Percy has questions, dozens of them, but he presses on forcefully. Though it feels like time has stopped in this quiet, still room, he cannot forget that all of their clocks are ticking away with every second. And Gringotts. It is Hermione's turn to grimace. I thought one of the Horcruxes may be in the Black family vault. It made sense at the time. Anyway, Draco helped us get in, but the goblins didn't want us to leave. They claimed we'd stolen the sword of Gryffindor. They demanded we return it to them, or they would not let us leave. I told them that I'd returned it to Hogwarts nearly 5 years ago, Harry says grumpily, but they didn't listen. We had to rescue a dragon to get past them. I see. Percy cringes to himself, thinking of the glittering sword in Severus' office. Hermione shakes her head. And we didn't even get a Horcrux. I was wrong. They lapse into a sullen, dispirited silence. Percy can tell they have been fed and showered, and are wearing new clothes likely transfigured from Tonk's old things, but they all have an air of shell-shocked horror that Percy is, unfortunately, rather familiar with. I'm sorry, Ron says again, giving Harry a tortured look. I'm so sorry, mate. If I hadn't stormed out, if you hadn't left, you'd all probably be dead, Percy says, cutting his brother off before he can delve into the regretful realm of if only. These may very well be the last few days of Percy's life, of many of their lives, and Percy does not want to spend them dwelling on the past. Some of his old pragmatism sharpens his tone as he snaps. That locket is a Horcrux. Ron, it's a part of the Dark Lord's soul. If Sirius was wearing it, it was just a matter of time before it possessed him. You lot may have been lucky once while dueling him, but if you'd stayed there, he would have eventually killed you all or taken you to the Dark Lord. You were lucky to get away from its influence. Quite right, says Andromeda quietly, quelling whatever protest was brewing in Ran's response. He settles back onto his seat, chastised. We couldn't figure out how to destroy it, Hermione says into the silence, and some of the irritation in her tone is familiar enough to the occupants of the room that it takes away a measure of the sorrow. Even Sirius. Percy exchanges a look with Andromeda. Granted, the locket is a Horcrux, but they knew of at least 3 ways to destroy it. Fiendfire, the light spell Andromeda had used, and basilisk venom. Surely Sirius Black, heir to the Black Line, would know of at least one other way to destroy something beyond magical repair. You needed to use Parseltongue to open it first. We did open it, Harry snaps, bristling. Once it was open, we tried everything. Smashing it, burning it, melting it, freezing it. When he looks up to Percy, his face is already registering his disappointment, already clearly marking this encounter as useless and moving on mentally to the next challenge. So you don't know how to destroy it. I have fangs of the basilisk from Hogwarts, Percy says a trifle tartly, reaching into his omnipresent book bag and taking out the fangs that Severus had given to him. Ginny managed to get them to me. Ginny, Harry and Ron say together, but in tones 2 worlds apart. Percy nods. Risked her life for it, too. I think these may work. Can you still open it? The locket, that is. Harry frowns at the question, but nods silently. The confirmation that Harry can still speak Parseltongue suggests to Percy he is still a Horcrux. Not that Percy knows for sure that Harry's ability would disappear if the Horcrux was destroyed, but he thinks that is a fairly safe guess to make. Well, open it, Percy says, levitating a small, curved fang over to Harry. Without meaning to, his voice has taken on a forced sort of joviality, as if he cannot help but strive to sound casual and in control in front of his little brother and his most irritating of friends. And then stab it. See what happens. Stop, don't touch that with your bare hand, are you mad? You take it, Harry says to Ron, not picking up the fang that hovers in front of his face. Me, Ron goggles at Harry. I can't destroy a Horcrux, mate, and anyway it affected me more than it did the rest of you. He turns pleading eyes on Hermione. Hermione, you do it. No, Harry says firmly. I want you to do it, and you don't know that it affected you the most. You were the first one to walk away from it. Sirius couldn't do that. Maybe that shows it has less power over you. Harry, I can't do it, says Ron desperately. I'll fuck it up for everyone. Hermione shudders and turns away from the locket, pressing tightly into the opposite side of the couch. Percy eyes her. He doesn't know what Sirius did to her under the influence of the locket, but he reckons he ought to try and find out. Perhaps Tonks can talk to her. No, she says shakily, all earlier composure lost. No, Ron, I don't want to be near it. Ron, for a second, looks at Draco, who looks unlikely to volunteer to go head-to-head with a piece of the Dark Lord's soul. But maybe the thought of Draco Malfoy being the one to destroy the Horcrux is repellent, or maybe Ron comes to some other conclusion in his mind. Nevertheless, he nods, firming his jaw, and uses his wand to tear off part of his shirt. Percy cannot help himself. He grimaces as he watches Ron begin to wrap his hand in the scrap. With a flick of his wand, Percy transfigures the rag into a set of leather gloves. Luckily, he knows Ron's glove size after he purchased him those keeper mitts all those years ago. Thanks, Ron says, a bit surprised. He slides on the gloves and then picks up the fang gingerly. He hesitates, but the gloves seem to be sufficient, or perhaps there is not any venom at the top of the fang. Gripping the small, curved fang more tightly, Ron takes a breath and nods firmly at Harry. Ready, but don't say I didn't warn you. Ron, for Merlin's sake, the worst thing the locket said to you was that Hermione and I were in love, and I can assure you that is not the case, Harry snaps at Ron. And you already know I'd trade it all to trade places with you. Mate, Ron begins, the blushes back on his and Harry's faces. Percy coughs and looks away, noticing that his discomfort is mirrored on Draco's face. Let's just do this, Harry says tiredly. He sets the locket down on the floor. Andromeda stirs from her silent position to Percy's left, but does not interrupt, though Tonks leans forward eagerly, and visibly steeling himself, hisses something sharp and guttural in Parseltongue. Smoke twists out of the locket. Percy recognizes that smoke, for it looks much the same as the smoke from the diadem. Thick and grey with undertones of brown, almost sulphuric smelling as it condenses into a form. He clutches the small grey stone in his pocket tightly, trying to keep his head as the familiar feel of Tom's magic spreads into the room. The form, to nobody's surprise, is that of Hermione. Percy tenses for a second, but the form does not seem to recognize Percy, nor turn to target him instead. "He'll never forgive you," says Ghost Hermione, her hair glossy and smooth, her eyes flashing with cruel power. "You killed his godfather, and he'll never forgive you for it." "I'm sorry," whispers Ron to the form and to Harry. "And now he has a new friend in Draco," continues the figure, rolling Draco's name sensuously in her mouth. "Draco and I are so similar, don't you think? We can spend hours discussing arithmancy or history. We took all the same classes. He's worthy of my intellect, whereas you are merely a distraction." "Be real, Weasley," Draco says, still perched gracefully in the opposite chair. "I mean, I am considerably smarter than you, but you think I'd go for Granger. Your sister loves Harry more than you," Ghost Hermione says scornfully. "I've been bored of you for years. Your brothers are all more important than you. Poor Ron, last loved, first to fail. Just give up, Ron, and it'll be easier for all of us to move on without you." "Ron," begins Hermione, the real one, and Ron flinches violently. "Ron, you know that's not true." "It is true," Ron whispers darkly. He grips the fang tightly. His eyes are dark with some emotion Percy cannot name, and Percy prepares to stun him if necessary. "It is true, or at least some of it is. But I'm still here. It's true, but it doesn't matter. You hear that, you little snake? I'm still here. I came back. So you can jolly well shut the fuck up." With a wordless cry of rage, Ron vaults himself out of the armchair and dives toward the locket. There is a flash and a bang and an explosion of smoke, and an unearthly scream that sends shivers down Percy's spine. But when the smoke clears, Percy sees that somehow Ron has managed to stab the locket directly in the center. As they all watch silently, the locket begins to shrivel in on itself, the gold growing tarnished, and the chain melting off, until all that is left is a small, silver snake in the shape of an S. Harry leans forward and tentatively picks it up. He closes his eyes, concentrating, and then opens them slowly. "It's gone." "Amazing," breathes Tonks, the first thing that she said all morning. "Jolly good show, Ron." "Well done, Ron," says Percy approvingly, though he has to avert his eyes a second later when Hermione gives Ron what could very well be their first kiss. But he is proud of Ron in a way. Ron's words reminded him of what Percy felt the first time he realized what his form was, back in his second, fourth year. Percy is a bit of a failure. He is arrogant. He is content to hide in the shadows until circumstances force him to act. But that is who he is, and there's not much he can do about it, so he may as well do the best he can with what he's already been given. It's a realization that he is discomforted to realize came much earlier to Ron than it did to him. But then again, Ron's childhood has been singularly unique. "Not bad, Weasley," says Draco, unfolding his lanky body from the armchair and stepping closer to the Horcrux. He nudges it carefully with his foot. "So it's gone, it's done." "That easy," says Harry wonderingly. His face is a study in pain, and Ron turns his attention from Hermione to give Harry a deep, steadying glance. "It was that easy if we just thought of the basilisk. Destroying the ring nearly killed Dumbledore," Percy points out quietly. "Yet Madame Tonks was able to fell the cup with a single spell. You cannot predict what will be effective for each Horcrux, nor chastise yourself for not realizing it sooner. The cup is destroyed. It was in the Black family vault," Percy confirms, and some of the color returns to Hermione's cheeks at this news. "We merely retrieved it first. So, which ones are left?" "Two," Percy says. "The diadem." "Tom, you mean?" Harry says lowly, and immediately everyone's attention turns back to Percy, who flushes at the insinuation in Harry's tone. "Who is Tom?" Tonks asks sharply, her senses attuned to the undercurrents in the room. "Percy has been collaborating with one of the Horcruxes," says Harry mercilessly. Percy does not look at Andromeda or Tonka. He stares only at Harry, at the angry glint in his shockingly green eyes, at the reddened scar twisting its way down his forehead. "Tom is one of the Horcruxes," Percy says quietly. "The diadem. The Dark Lord kept him too close to Nagini, and the diadem was able to use the shared magic between them to create a form. He watches me carefully, I admit it, but I have helped to destroy the rest of the Horcruxes. Immediately there is a loud, confused babble of questions, but Percy continues to talk, looking evenly at Harry, searching, perhaps, for a glimpse of Tom behind the boy's features. He made the diary with Myrtle's death. We all saw that destroyed. The ring with Tom's father's death destroyed by Dumbledore. The locket destroyed by Ron. Then Hufflepuff's cup, which Madame Tonks destroyed. The snake was destroyed by Tom when he came back to a living form. And the last, Percy cuts himself off abruptly, his chest heaving. Everyone else is silent, mesmerized by his slow, steady count of the Dark Lord's soul. And, Harry asks, nearly silently. Percy hesitates. I think I ought to tell you alone. The trio bristles. Draco, curiously, does not react, but leans back in his chair and watches Percy evaluatively. Anything you can tell me, you can tell them. Even me, Potter, Draco says smoothly, crossing his arms and raising one pale eyebrow. Harry turns and gives Draco a look full of meaning. Yeah, I reckon you're one of us now. Something visibly passes between the two boys, some reflection of some meaningful moment or conversation. Percy does not care. Harry, I really think I ought to tell you this alone. Dumbledore told Esme himself. You've been to his portrait? Andromeda asks shrewdly from behind him, her voice startling Percy. He turns and gives her a meaningful look of her own, and she nods slightly. She would understand the reference to Severus. Once, at great personal risk to myself, I may add, I managed to slip away from Lucius long enough to make my way to Dumbledore's office. He lies. Draco leans forward. Are my parents alive? This reminds Percy that he has to tell Harry of the Elder Wand also, not to mention still the items of the will. He is already exhausted, and they've not even come to the most important bits of the conversation. Yes, well, I assume so. Draco narrows his eyes, every inch the Malfoy air. What? Before I tell you, I have to ask Harry a question, Percy evades. Harry, has your wand been adequate? What do you mean? Harry tightens his grip on his wand, which to Percy's eye seems to be his standard Harley and Phoenix. Have you been in any duels? Percy tries to ask lightly. With Death Eaters, perhaps, or Ron or Draco. Of course, did you think we were camping out peacefully in the middle of nowhere? Ron interjects, his ears flaming red as he shifts protectively, and Percy would wager, instinctively, to cover Harry partially with his body. The Dark Lord is struggling with his wand, he says, partially lying to cover his interest. Specifically in duels, specifically with spells like disarming, stunning, and so on. Spells that would normally confer an exchange of wand ownership, at least temporarily. Harry frowns behind his glasses, his eyes dark as he considers whatever they have been through over the last few months. My wand has been the same, I think, he says slowly. I haven't been in that many duels, I suppose. Not the type of duels that would, confer an exchange of ownership. You dueled Malfoy, Ron reminds him with a nasty grin at Draco, who rolls his eyes right back in exchange. I was under duress, Weasley. Odd how you're under duress every time there's a duel, wouldn't you say? Stop it, breaks in Percy forcefully. He meets Harry's eyes, hoping the other boy will sense the importance of being honest and forthright. Did you defeat Draco in the duel? Barely, scoffs Draco, but Percy waves him aside. Harry considers it. I think so. I disarmed him, but I gave him the wand back. Why do I have ownership over Draco's wand now? Draco clutches at his wand frightfully, but Percy cannot help but allow a smile of relief to spread over his face. At least they had not ruined this. Perhaps it had happened this way in the earlier timeline, too. Perhaps Harry and Draco were fated to have a volatile relationship, trapped in duels and counter-duels in any timeline. This duel, it wasn't a play duel, correct? You were dueling him to win. Since I thought he was a bloody Death Eater, yeah, I was dueling him to win, says Harry heatedly. Hermione breaks in, her voice steadier than before, and her eyes clear and questioning. Why does it matter if Harry has ownership over Draco's wand? Percy hesitates, and then decides to just say what he has to say. Have you lot heard of the Elder Wand? Their reactions are interesting. Percy had expected confusion, or perhaps a vague recognition of the type that is on Draco and Andromeda's faces. The Elder Wand is a legend, part of the tales told to small wizards before bed. It thought Harry would be completely oblivious, though Hermione, of course, likely studied the wizarding bedtime stories with the same intensity that she looked through her textbooks before the year began. Percy certainly would have. But instead, all three of them flinch, and something blazes in Harry's eyes that look like triumph. He leans forward eagerly and says, "It's real, isn't it? It's what he is looking for. I've been seeing things, visions, dreams." "Yes," Percy says carefully. "Dumbledore was the last known owner of it." He hesitates and then nudges Tales of Beedle the Bard toward the others. "He left you this in his will, to tip you off that the Hallows exist. It takes Hermione and Draco both only seconds to come to the same conclusion." Percy watches a look of amazement and glee cross swiftly over Draco's features before his face screws into a disappointed scowl. "You couldn't have told me that earlier." "I'm sorry," Ron interjects. "You're saying that the Elder Wand is real, and that Malfoy had it, and now what Harry is its master?" Percy eyes Ron carefully. "You're not going to be jealous, are you?" Ron flushes and does not answer. Perhaps he does not know. Percy may be jealous if he didn't know better. Being the master of the Elder Wand was not an honor Percy particularly wanted. If anything, it would paint a target on his head that he had no intention of ever incurring. "I told you, Hermione." Harry exclaims, turning to Hermione, who sniffs in response. "I told you. Dumbledore wanted me to have it. He wanted me to be the master of death. How do you lot know about the Hallows?" "Luna's dad," Ron says dismissively, waving his hand. "A bit of a crackpot. He tried to turn us into the Death Eaters, but I guess he wasn't lying about this." He most certainly was not. Percy puts aside the question of why the elder Lovegood would even know about the Hallows, let alone think to tell Harry, let alone try to then turn Harry into the Death Eaters, and reaches into his bag for the Elder Wand. Hesitating for just a second, he hands over the wand. Percy has not tried to use it, nor really even to look at it. It positively emanates negative energy, the type of deep, ancient magic that coats the inside of Tom's cave. It sends shivers down Percy's spine and insidiously conjures whispers in his ears. "Was that what you needed to tell me?" Harry asks. Percy demurs further by handing over the book next to Hermione, who takes it almost reverently at the revelation that Dumbledore had given this to her. This time, Percy cannot prevent himself from fidgeting. Harry is grinning, even as Draco sulks in the corner, cradling the Elder Wand like it is a gift straight from Dumbledore. He's so young, despite the dark shadows behind his eyes. How can Percy be the one to tell him that he is going to die? Severus ought to do it. But no, that would be cruel. For Severus to spend his life protecting Harry, only to know it was all for naught, Percy shudders at the thought. Maybe it should have been McGonagall, who would know how to say the words bluntly, but they missed their chance to confide in McGonagall. Even Tonks would be better at telling Harry what his fate is. Anyone other than Percy. But Harry doesn't have anyone other than Percy, and he barely has Percy, considering that Percy is setting him up to die. So no, Percy cannot prevent himself from swallowing around a lump in his throat, from biting his lip uncomfortably and fidgeting in his chair. "I should tell you alone," he tries one last time, but he already knows his plea will be futile. Harry shakes his head, and Percy just says it all at once. "You're a Horcrux, Harry." Forgive me, he thinks, but he does not know whose forgiveness he needs. After Percy's shocking announcement, the mood changes in the room so quickly it is as if the temperature cooled by several degrees within seconds. Andromeda and Tonks make matching sounds of surprise. Hermione gasps into the silence, but covers her mouth a hot beat later, clutching at Ron's hands so tightly that Percy notices her knuckles go white. Draco presses himself into the back of his chair, staring at Harry with horror, though Percy would be willing to bet his horror was both for Harry and about Harry. But Harry, the look on Harry's face is the worst, confusion to fear to understanding to resignation, all within seconds, the emotions so readily available for anyone to read. He is so young. When Harry finally speaks, it is not the question Percy is expecting. "How? I don't know," Percy says quietly. "Dumbledore told me he thinks perhaps the spell he cast at you 17 years ago misfired, or perhaps the protections your mother laid down interfered with it. Perhaps it is due to the prophecy. The Dark Lord was planning on using your death to create another Horcrux, the Sword of Gryffindor, actually, but instead his soul attached itself to you." Harry's eyes are heavy with disgust. I'm a part of his soul." Percy shakes his head. Harry is clearly not like Tom, not like any of the Toms that Percy has ever known. Something about this case is different, though Percy has not been able to discern precisely why that would be so. "His soul is inside you," he clarifies. It's why you can sense him and why you can speak parcel tongue. But you are not his soul. He did the same to Nagini, but purposefully. Harry falls back in his chair, his face looking ashen. So I must die, he whispers out loud, and Hermione whimpers audibly at the words. No, Ron says, shaking his head. No, there's got to be a way to get it out. Percy, that's why you're here, right? You know loads about magic. Hermione, there's got to be a way, right? Hermione seeks Percy's eyes, but he can only shake his head slowly. I've even asked a Dementor, he says quietly. I do not think there is anything to be done. Harry laughs tonelessly. It's the prophecy, he says, his eyes mossy green as he stares in front of him. Neither can live while the other survives. He has to kill me, doesn't he? If he kills me, he'll be vulnerable. Percy still does not actually agree with Dumbledore's interpretation of the prophecy that Voldemort has to be the one to kill Harry. Surely anyone could kill Harry, and that would remove the Horcrux, if that was all that was necessary for victory. But he nods. Percy still has a suspicion, or perhaps a futile hope, that Harry will survive the conflict with Voldemort, whether because he is the chosen one or because he carries a part of Tom in his soul. And after I'm dead, that's it, right? And Tom. Harry, don't do anything rash, do you hear me? Every second I am still alive is a second he is killing other people. Harry roars, the vehemence in his voice shocking everyone in the room. He leaps out of the chair and stands, panting in front of Percy, a fierce blush staining his cheeks. We do not have time to waste. Harry, think, Percy says, taking a pleading step forward. Let's assume he does have to kill you. Once he does, it will be pandemonium. He'll think he won. Everyone will lose hope, Harry. I shudder to think what will happen if the Death Eaters believe they truly have no resistance left. It will be horrible, Tonks says quietly. Harry, it will be horrible. You've not been seeing what's been happening in the Ministry, and with all of the captured Muggleborns, if everyone knows you're dead, they'll all lose hope, and that's all we have to fight with right now. If you walk off and get yourself killed tomorrow, that won't give us time to plan, continues Percy desperately. Look, I don't want you to die. I'm hoping you don't die, obviously, and I'm doing my best to find a way to keep you alive. But maybe you will have to die. Percy, Ron objects, his face white. No, he's right, Harry says grimly. Why am I special? Dozens of people are dying every day. Dumbledore died to destroy the ring Horcrux. Regulus and Sirius died to destroy the locket. My life is not more valuable than anyone else's. Percy meets Harry's eyes and hopes that his apologies are clearly written across his face. I hate to say it, he says quietly, but if you have to die, you should die at the right time. Harry does not do anything as immature as collapse into tears, but something slides into place behind his green eyes, and he nods brusquely. I'm not going to do anything rash, he says quietly. I will do what I need to do. You stay here, Percy says, flicking his eyes at Andromeda. She looks sorrowful but not overly emotional. He would be willing to bet that she will not lose any sleep over Harry's impending demise, nor more than she would mourn for any of them if they had to die to secure peace. He winces and then says, all in a rush, the Dark Lord has Ginny. What? Percy holds his hands up to forestall the three worried teenagers that all immediately leapt to their feet. She will be safe. I can ensure that, if little else. You will receive a summons soon by the Dark Lord in your head, I'd wager. You must come to that meeting prepared to die. The Dark Lord must not know that you are a Horcrux. He doesn't know, does he? Says Harry shrewdly. Percy shakes his head. And he cannot know, do you understand? Dumbledore was insistent that the Dark Lord be the one to kill you. He forces the words out despite the ache that is beginning to build in his chest. When that happens, Tom will kill the Dark Lord. He is waiting only for the prophecy to be fulfilled. The second that Tom defeats the Dark Lord, any of us that is able must try and kill Tom. But we must be careful. Tom is the most powerful wizard I've ever met, and so you must not engage with him lightly. Percy meets all of their gazes steadily, one after the other, beginning with Tonks, who blazes fiercely at him, and ending with Andromeda, who nods soberly. Andromeda understands what he is saying, that it will likely be up to her, or any of the other adult wizards, to destroy Tom, perhaps at the cost of their lives. I am sorry, Percy says one last time, now looking only at Harry. I wish this were not true. I wish I was not the one that had to tell you. Despite what you all may believe, I have never wanted to betray you. In fact, I have been working to help you for many years, though I pretended otherwise. Harry nods silently. You didn't have to tell me the rest of it, he observes quietly. You could have told me that Ginny was captured, and you would have known I would come. Yes, Percy gives the faintest of shrugs. But you deserve to go to your death with the understanding of what it will accomplish. Hermione gives a little sob, and Ron clutches her tightly, both of them looking desperately at Harry, who gives a strangely calm nod at these words. Thank you. And Percy, for perhaps the first time in his life, feels suddenly that he understands the boy who lived. Percy had identified several key tasks to complete over the next 24 hours. He wanted to ask Severus to speak to McGonagall, to warn her and the other trustworthy professors to be on guard for a possible intrusion. He hoped to brew some emergency potions to bring to battle. He needed to repair his brittle occlumency shields, fluttering in the wind after that emotional confrontation. And he planned to speak to Yaxley and Nart, to glean any last insights of what may be occurring out of his field of vision. And Tom, of course. Percy wanted to talk to Tom. But the Dark Lord, perhaps also envisioning a long list of mischief Percy could get up to in 24 hours, summons him just hours after he returns to his flat. I thought you would be interested in looking after your sister personally, says Voldemort magnanimously. Thank you, my lord. Percy presses his head to the floor for an extra second in silent supplication before he raises it. He does not think Ginny will be hurt, though this undoubtedly will be a frightening experience for her, and he has so many things to do. Voldemort smiles his lipless smile, perhaps catching a glimpse of the frustration roiling through Percy's mind. Do not fret, Percival, he chides. You will have a part to play in this battle and in battles thereafter. Yes, my lord. Percy stands at a nod from the Dark Lord, though he keeps his hands folded and his head slightly bowed. Voldemort surveys him silently. Percy immediately begins to sweat, though he does not feel any pressure into his mind. No, whatever Voldemort seems to be seeking from him is purely visual, in the cut of the same silver robes he'd been wearing earlier, in the lines of his tired face. This war has not been easy on you, Voldemort observes, but it has been good for you too. Percy flinches despite himself, the observation searing. My lord, I remember how you crawled in here the first time, Voldemort says meditatively. Percy stands very still, unsure of how to deal with the Dark Lord in this mood. In this way, he is different from Tom, particularly now that Tom has melded, in some way, with his younger self. Voldemort at times reminds Percy of Severus. When he is not in a cruel, violent mood, he has a mature, academic sort of air that is uncomfortably familiar. You could barely stand. And then your fine performance at the marking, of course. That was when I began to take note of you. Voldemort pauses expectantly, so Percy says obediently, Thank you, my lord. So many of them are so dull, Voldemort says with a sigh. So many of them are so easy to kill, says Tom, in Percy's memories. They snivel and they bow and they long pathetically for my acclaim. I admit I had hoped for more from pureblood society's finest. Perhaps a failing in education, my lord, Percy suggests, interested despite himself. You are one of the few wizards I've met that dare to speak like that to me, Voldemort comments coolly, but Percy is waiting for the dangerous shift in magic, and he tentatively relaxes when it does not come. Severus, of course. Abraxas was another. I apologize, my lord, for my impertinence. Voldemort silences him with a glance of his glinting red eyes. This war has provided an opportunity for you to prove yourself, to hone your magics, to determine your loyalties, to take the power you are capable of wielding. You are a different wizard now, Percival, with my mark than you would have been without it. It is true, my lord, Percy says truthfully. So this is what the Dark Lord wants today, reassurance and praise and gratitude. He straightens, not quite looking the Dark Lord in his eyes, but not bowing either, and explains, I've always longed for more, my lord, to have more, to do more, to see more. I do not know how I would have accomplished these goals without your leadership. So what have you decided, to the question I posed you last? Percy cannot help it. His eyes snap to Voldemort's, and a shudder runs through him at the unexpected contact and the way his magic sparks around him. My lord, you must choose, Percival, whispers Voldemort enticingly, his voice low and hoarse. You can fail me, as Severus has failed me and Lucius and the others, or you can vow to learn by my side. Percy frowns to himself, not liking the strange edge in the Dark Lord's voice as he named Severus as someone who has failed him. But Voldemort is waiting for an answer, and as usual there is only one to give. I would be honored to serve at your side, my lord. Good. The Dark Lord sits back in his throne, and only then does Percy realize the gesture contains a hint of relief, as if Voldemort had been worried to hear his answer. We will conduct the ritual after the boy is dead. Yes, my lord, says Percy, thinking to himself nervously that quite a lot is going to occur when the boy is dead, and he does not feel ready for any of them. Ginny is ensconced safely in a frilly girl's room off in the east wing of Parkinson Manor, a room absolutely covered in pink wallpaper and white curtains, a room so completely unlike Ginny that he feels a burning relief the moment he sees it. And indeed, when Ginny looks up to see him in the doorway, her expression seems to suggest that the greater irritation to her is the horrid decorating taste of the room's previous occupant, rather than her captivity so proximate to the Dark Lord. Percy lingers awkwardly in the doorway, cataloguing every inch of Ginny with his eyes, though her form is unfamiliar to him after so long, so unfamiliar that he cannot say whether her tired, determined look, or the edge in her deep brown eyes, or the small cut on her forehead is due to her position as bait or the trials of the last year. I knew her, you know, Ginny says finally, nodding at the room. Pansy, this is exactly what I imagined her room would look like. This breaks some of the hard shell of tension that seemed to have frozen Percy's limbs. He moves gratefully into the room and settles himself uncomfortably on a white round chair that sits in front of a dark walnut vanity desk. Ginny, on the bed, watches his movements carefully. They could have redecorated it for you, he offers. My friend, a pang, which he swallows past. Well, I once went to the house of a classmate where the house elves painted the room anew for each visitor. Ginny snorts, shaking her head. He notes that her hair is much shorter now than it had once been, and a bit jagged, as if she'd gone at it savagely with a spell, rather than submitting to the tender ministrations of their mother. Bloody hell. Percy manages to contain his anxious curiosity for 5 heartbeats, counting them as they thud against his thumb, pressed tightly against the opposite wrist. Then how did you? Percy, it was him, it was Tom, Ginny says over his question, her face suddenly regaining some of its childishness as she bites her lip nervously. He knew where I was. Tom, Percy sits back heavily, his hand leaving his wrist to scrabble for purchase on the girl's vanity. Tom, his face impassive, shouldering Ginny. What do you mean? I know it sounds crazy, Ginny says urgently, leaning forward on the bed. But I saw him, Percy. I've been seeing him all term. I thought I was going mad. Just around the corner or down the stairs, things like that. Me and Neville, we were planning a raid on the Carrows' office for tomorrow night. We were casing out the wards around their office, and then all of a sudden I heard a laugh, and I knew it was Tom, Percy. I remembered him. Percy watches with his heart in his throat as Ginny shivers into herself. Tom, Hogwarts, the thoughts jumble over each other in his head, and Percy wants to dive into her head and see the evidence for himself. But he is cognizant of the fact that they are likely being watched, either by a spell or a nosy house elf concealing itself in the corner, and so he only says firmly, You're mistaken, Ginny. I am not. You will listen to me. Percy does not like the way that Ginny falls silent, glaring at him mutinously, but he tries to impress upon her the seriousness of the situation in the even tone he uses to say, I do not have much time, Ginevra. I need you to heed my words well. He sees her begin to frown, registering the strange cadence of his words. You will not be harmed. You are here for your own protection, as well as to entice Harry Potter to return the Dark Lord's summons. Ginny stands, her hand flying instinctively to the spot on her arm where her holster would have housed her wand, though of course someone, Tom, would have carefully confiscated it earlier. Percy, what are you saying? There is nothing you can do, Percy continues fiercely. He rises from his seat and takes a slow step toward Ginny, wanting to shake her or bind her or stun her so that she remains safe in this childish room until everything is over. This is the only way, the correct way, for this war to end, you understand me? How can I understand you when you're telling me that you're going to trade my life for Harry's? You are an upstanding witch, Percy bites out. You are a pureblood, and you have done nothing wrong except for engage in childish pranks. Do you hear what I am saying? Before Ginny can speak again, Percy thinks suddenly of the last time he'd really talked to Ginny in any sort of meaningful way. Merlin, she was so young then, and Merlin, she's so young now, 16 or perhaps 17. He cannot quite remember now. He does not know if it is the juvenile Dacre or his sudden awareness of Ginny's vulnerability, but she looks like a child to him, the defiant jut of her jaw contrasting the soft roundness of her cheeks. He catches her eyes and holds her gaze, willing her to listen to him. "We had a conversation once on a train," he says deliberately. She nods warily, her expression complex. "What I said then remains true. You must trust me, Ginevra, trust me to do what is best for our family, and those we care for as part of our family. The Dark Lord is correct in the action he is taking, and with time, you will come to understand why. You will be closely monitored while you stay here. Your compliance will earn you the freedom you seek, once the nasty business that remains is concluded." Ginny frowns at him, but this time her frown has more confusion than animosity. Percy can only hope that she trusts him, or the memory of him, enough to listen to him. He cannot guarantee that she will not be more harshly contained if she tries to fight, so she must at least understand she is being observed. Percy takes the last step and cautiously takes her hand. She tenses but does not pull away, and he squeezes it tightly, remembering how it felt when it was small and chubby and inevitably sticky. "Nobody will be unnecessarily hurt. Promise me, Ginny, promise me that you will listen to me." She does not respond, and he squeezes hard, so hard that she suppresses a wince. But it is not an angry squeeze, rather, it is a worried one, and perhaps Ginny understands that, for she nods slowly and says quietly, "I promise, Percival." And he has to hope that is enough.